Welcome, all gentle species. This is a consideration that got launched when I was thinking, what would be my critical response to Bruce Springsteen, for example? How's he doing vis-a-vis, my expectations of a contemporary artist? And I'd have to say, based on compiling my research of his movie Blood Brothers and all the interviews, including some awesome recent interviews in Rolling Stone issue dedicated to Bruce Springsteen, where he's very candid about how depressed he was. At the height of success, height of achieving materialistic kingship of capitalism. I mean, if you're a rock star, you're at the highest level of social hierarchy. To be a rock star is the very, contemporary definition of you're the top alpha consumer, bitch. And so what we get with Bruce Springsteen is almost like, yes, I think you almost saw my nads. A guy who epitomizes the ultimate rock star status in America, and yet is still kind of depressed, disillusioned with the ideals of his country. That's obvious from his lyrics. Maybe disillusioned with himself as a jerk, asshole. He's supposed to be the boss. He's supposed to be all that. He's worshipped. The guy is worshipped. The guy is worshipped. And yet, still not happy and content. And yet now he says he's happy and content because he's mastered balance of family life with career, and he's achieved, that crowning ultimate glory of success. Only comparable person who's reached that level at this point is Paul McCartney, and Mick Jagger, achieving knighthood in England. You could say our example in America would be Bruce Springsteen, and up and coming Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam. That's the best we've got in rock. The best that's left over in post-egoic epoch of rock and roll is Pearl Jam and Bruce Springsteen. So we have to do our analysis of what do their lyrics mean, what does their message amount to, and what effect does that have on culture, given the importance that rock and roll is supposed to play in being on the cutting edge of cultural expansion, cultural growth, evolution, and so forth. But is that really the case, people? Is rock really doing what it's supposed to do? And what is rock supposed to do? Really? What was the original founding premise of rock and roll? Freedom! Ecstasy! Tolerance! Liberation, ultimately. But let's even go, liberation to me is the ultimate exalted, transcendental idea of rock, which is that rock is about freedom, but not just freedom to baby, get your groove on and feel good, or pursue all of your worldly, pleasurable pursuits, and be a rock star. Again, what is the definition of rock star? The person who's achieved alpha status as a consumer gets to have the biggest swag, pussy, bling, status, prestige, even political status, as we've seen with rock and roll injecting itself into geopolitical, with Bono, etc. Bruce, Obama, So there's a level at which rock at its most exalted crust is interacting with the ruling class and supposed to maybe have some kind of progressive influence on the power structure. So Bono's hitting up Bush for billions for aid to Africa in the form of debt relief and AIDS drugs. And that was a true and righteous campaign, and it continues to be so. You have heard or will hear my critique of all remedial progressive movements that aren't yet affiliated with Global Cooperative Forum, are yet tribal, and yet perpetuating egoic fault. Dear Bono, we'll get into that later. So yes, continue to do aid to Africa, but get the big picture also. But that's a digression. So what is the highest and ultimate purpose of rock and roll? That's our thesis today. how do Pearl Jam and Bruce Springsteen as the highest exemplars of American contemporary surviving rock meet the cut, meet the grade, meet the standards I'm laying down. Not me. Not me, Qua. Me. No. People, I'm basing it on wisdom. Ultimate wisdom. Ultimate wisdom. My critique of rock is based on ultimate wisdom. So, eat my total shit, Ken Wilber and Deepak Chopra. You guys who've disavowed this ultimate wisdom while making your buck off the consciousness market. You'll be hearing from me later in another rant. So, the ultimate and greatest purpose of rock has been a composite of many values, and we could go down that rabbit hole, but I just want to get a few working ideas for that to jump from. That rock and roll was fundamentally founded on the principles of tolerance, ecstasy, and freedom. And that freedom would look like personal freedom for self-expression, personal freedom of ecstasy, personal freedom to love any color, race, or person of any status in society of your choice. Love is free. Flower power is real. Peace, love, and understanding, those are all part of the 60s consciousness movement. They're all part of the birth of rock and roll. It was all part of taking the racial tolerance between black and white that rock and roll exemplified right up front with Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley, making the love happen between everybody of every kind of color. So we knew rock was badass because of breaking down racial and sexual barriers right away. Right away it was liberationist from the standpoint of sex and from the standpoint of race. Then with Dylan, from the standpoint of literary values, rock and roll became radically expanded. LSD entered the picture with the Beatles, John Lennon, Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, and Brian Wilson. Consciousness is exploding in rock, and rock's paradigm explodes as to what its greatest purpose is. And after those geniuses, what is the greater purpose of rock? At least freedom, ecstasy, love, and tolerance. So, if you wanted to carry the torch for rock and be a great rock artist, you have to at least meet those standards that were set in those areas of what are the founding principles of rock and how are those founding principles exemplified by the greatest artists, including the Grateful Dead, who showed again the example of tolerance. They tolerated their audience pirating the recordings of their live shows. They tolerated their audience being a living community that was thriving off the band. And Jerry Garcia, God bless him, was not only a great artist, but a certain kind of leader that, again, exemplifies certain values within the highest principles of rock that you should be aware of and maintain. Titty-sucking little bitches. You know my message is serious when I use language like that. Just had to let out Moses. Thank you for your patience. I'm indulging in Lisa Cairns-esque freeform ranting where there's long pauses and, she eats her soup and... Oh God, I'm obsessed. Okay. Gather your wits, Cedar Jones. Gather your faculties and think. Give the people the truth. So the highest, greatest, and purposes of rock and why you should uphold them. You, cheesy underpants-smelling artists of the world. What is your highest and greatest purpose? What is your highest and greatest values? You better get with it now. The world has no more time for you to be indulging in capitalist fantasies of my sob story about girlfriend X or boyfriend Y. My seeking in the realm of romance. My seeking in the realm of mind and imagination and bullshit, capitalist bling, and the horrible evil represented by video games, rap music, and contemporary mediocre rock and roll. That is to say, complete capitulation to the ego culture. Fuck that! It's my camera. It's my computer. I can sit here as long as I want. You people don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know who you're dealing with. The highest, greatest purpose in rock and roll must be always aligned with and criticized with reference to the ultimate wisdom. The ultimate wisdom, which is not to his piece and everything by Adi Da, epitomized by what he wrote in this book, The Aletheon. So yes, I am trying to develop a critique of art and rock and roll based on my own reflections on my devotion to Adi Da. And just letting it in a way be like, if Heartmaster is here presently and I'm addressing you, Bhagavan, and this is a consideration with you. People get to watch me have a consideration with you. And that's what it's about. It's not about this ego entertaining you ego fuckers out there. Fuck that shit. You're not a separate self. Listen to Lisa Cairns. Listen to Adi Da. Listen to Santosha Tantra. So if we were to analyze, for example, Bruce Springsteen's oeuvre, including the movie Blood Brothers and the current interviews in Rolling Stone, and his own body of work and his lyrical writing, you conclude that in spite of him being the alpha competitor in the capitalist system, being the epitome of the American rock star, you can't achieve a higher status other than being U.S. president, is to be, the biggest American rock stars or the biggest British rock stars. Because why? Because Britain and the British territories, or ex-British territories of Australia and New Zealand, and the English territories, all have this claim to rulership on planet Earth. It's the English-speaking white devils that think that they're going to rule the planet through nuclear hostage-taking, basically. That's another rant. Nuclear white devils, step back! So we're analyzing Bruce Springsteen's oeuvre in light of our best contemporary understanding of ultimate wisdom, and filtering that through the three characteristics of freedom, ecstasy, and tolerance. Now, freedom is the thing where I'm saying Bruce and Eddie Vedder are lacking. They don't have a great vision of what results in true freedom. They're not utilizing a great vision, a greater vision, except for the conventional social gospel of love thy brother, and that's tolerance. And we've had the message of tolerance for centuries in Christianity in the West. It's not enough. It's not enough to say love everybody or be tolerant, because it still is not utilizing or relying on ultimate wisdom. So, in the light of ultimate wisdom, it's not enough to say, adhere to the social gospel. Treat everyone as you would have them treat you. Love everyone as though they were your spiritual sister and brother. I bet you saw my junk again. Freeze frame that shit and find out. Okay. So if we're going to see there's a deficiency in the best that American rock has to offer right now, because Eddie Vedder and Bruce Springsteen still lack a greater vision about ultimate wisdom. What is ultimate wisdom? It's Adi-da and not to his piece, especially as they pertain to the ego, your ego. Right now, you're doing it. Right? Nope. Got my eye on you. My consciousness eye never sleeps. I'm watching you. Okay. No, consciousness is not like that. I'm misrepresenting consciousness by acting like that. Maybe. But you're doing it. You're doing it right now. You're doing the ego that is the primary fault that is causing your suffering, all of your worst suffering, not caused, as it turns out, by death, the imminence of death, the universality of death, and the ever-present presence of death is still not a reason or justification for collapse into the ego suffering. So, if death and mortality are not the real reason for ego suffering, then what is? Moi. Me. I'm the cause of the suffering. But there's no me. Isn't that weird? So there's no self. But when I think I am a self, I suffer. When I presume to be a separate self, I suffer. When I emotionally and energetically contract, I suffer. When I identify with the idea of being a separate self, I suffer. But just being me, suffering. Just being plain old Theo Cedar Jones as a separate self, suffering, 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 suffering. Have you gotten in touch with your suffering? Or do you deflect it, divert it, demonize it, degrade it? It's just right there. Like the Tingler and Vincent Price. You can't get at it. You can't operate on yourself and get the Tingler out. You're trying to control this fear, the chest burster from Alien. I lived with it for years. And how did I do it? How did you do it, Cedar Jones? How did you get over your fear? You didn't really get over your fear, did you? Okay, side tangent upon side tangent. My barnacles have barnacles, okay? My fractals have little baby Snoopy fractals on the bottom side. But be that as it may, if you're making a serious analysis of Bruce Springsteen's lyrics, and you're noticing that he's confessing, at the top of his rock and roll stardom and achievement, he was pretty much a depressed asshole. And now he says he's happy and content because he's balanced family life with career and achieving that knighthood Paul McCartney level of social status in America. Like, he's going to be one of the top legends of American life, like Abraham Lincoln and John Kennedy. Because the first great rockers in America, the greatest ones, Jimi Hendrix, Bruce Springsteen, Eddie Vedder, Yeah, we need more American rock stars. I'm telling you, it's not enough. Their message isn't enough. Their great white hope or great Negroid hope of rock is not delivered because it does not have ultimate wisdom. Especially in the area that is outside of their one area of strength. The one area of strength in rock is universal love, which is almost equivalent to tolerance as spoken of in Not to His Peace, and yet it's still an ego version of tolerance to say, love everybody, all you need is love. Can't we all get along? Flower power, something. The hippie universal love thing, remember? The hippies weren't just saying love some subset of people, it was love everybody, right? Love is a general principle. It's for everybody. It's just everywhere. It's universal. That was the hippie vision at its highest. And yet, universal love is not enough. Universal love as a vision is not enough. Universal love is still egoic because it lacks ultimate wisdom and because it lacks a critique of the ego. It lacks the ultimate wisdom that Adida and only Adida has provided about ego and ego culture and what to do about it. So this is my challenge to you, Bruce Springsteen and Eddie Vedder and Bono and Paul McCartney and Brian Wilson. You guys are still alive. Stevie Wonder. You're supposed to be the greatest visionaries of rock. And you'll notice there hasn't been any very much greater than you since you. So rock is not in the best shape. The message, remember, ecstasy, freedom, tolerance, and I know so much more. But if we could at least uphold these three, and you've got tolerance and universal love, but what's missing? Ultimate wisdom. So I beg you, I appeal to you now, read Not to His Peace. It's as simple as that, and get back to me. Read Not to His Peace and get back to me. Theo Cedar Jones.